Hello, everyone. This is Dr. CV. I'm so delighted to welcome you all to this amazing podcast series, She Special Podcast Series, where we get to know more about amazing, wonderful women leaders across the globe. And today we have Miss Anita Otubu. Anita is from Nigeria, and I'm so delighted to welcome Anita to this episode of SheSight's She podcast series. About Anita, Anita is a sustainable energy advocate in simple words, but she's much more than that. She is currently serving as a senior director at Sustainable Energy for All, SC for All. In this role, she heads the Universal Energy Facility, which is a results based financing initiative aimed at enhancing renewable energy accessibility and reliability across sub Saharan Africa. She has more than 15 years of experience in energy policy, project management, and sustainable development. She has devoted her entire career to improving energy access in underserved communities. She did start her career as a legal officer and caseworker in UK. From there, she moved on to Nigeria, where she has been a strong advocate of sustainable energy. She's also a member of various influential organizations, including the United Nations. She has a Bachelor's of Law from the Kingston University, as well as an executive leadership program from Harvard Business School. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so delighted to welcome Miss Anita Otubu to the show. Welcome, Miss Anita.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for coming and going to share your journey and your experiences with our audience today. Um, okay, so let's get started. Who is Anita Otubu?
Anita Otubu is a wife, a mother. I'm a career woman. I'm a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
also a program manager, and currently passionate about climate sector, climate change, as well as energy access, all about development, all about socio-economic development. There's just so much.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's so beautifully summarized. Anyway, so let's get into Anita, the career leader in energy segment in Africa. Um, Before I go into details of what your work is currently, I would love you to share with us your journey of little Anita. What was your dream as a young girl, and how did you navigate your career journey to become where you are? Let's start from your childhood.
So I was born and raised in the UK, in
Mhm.
London, to be precise. And to be very honest with you, I can't say that I've always dreamed to be a lawyer
Okay.
or to be even in this sector.
Mhm.
Um, Quite frankly, I didn't really have a plan per se, but
Mm.
I did come from a very strong, and I do come from a very strong Nigerian family
Yeah.
where it was always made clear to you from the beginning that you were either going to be a doctor,
Okay.
lawyer, or engineer.
Okay. That's
And
very Indian also. Or Asian for that matter, I guess.
yeah, so
Yeah.
being that I wasn't good at maths or science,
Mhm.
but I was good at English, history, the arts types of
Yes.
subjects, it only made sense that I would go into law. Yes, not wasn't really planning towards a particular career, but I did know that I wanted to make my parents proud. There was no plan per se, and I think this should give some level of comfort to those young girls who really don't know what they want to become. Sometimes it can come to you in your 20s, and some people come to them in their 30s. I think it's important to sort of just allow things to happen naturally as you start to understand what interests you, what your passions are, and work towards that. But I think the most important thing is getting that education first and foremost,
Yes.
and then at some point you would figure out, okay, is this the path? If not, you can, further your education and probably take up a course which is relevant to what you're interested in, or you can try and make it work with your existing degree, which is what I did, coming into a male-dominated, engineering sector.
Yeah. So that brings me to the next question. So you started off, or you did your undergrad and graduation, everything in law, and then you ended up in as you said, rightly said, male-dominated engineering sector. So how did you feel that transition? How did you undergo that transition? Was it a shock in the beginning, or how did you navigate it?
So I moved to Nigeria after having concluded law school in the UK and having worked in the public and private sector in the UK. Decided that I wanted to, experience what it was like to live in my own country of origin. And actually, having been to law school after in Nigeria, I decided to work in a law firm.
Mm,
It was in that role that I met a lady who was working for the Honorable Minister of Power at the time,
mm,
of Power. And an opportunity came up for me to join and, advise and everything legal in the sector.
yeah,
And that's when I was first exposed to the power sector. Um, at the same time, I guess why I was very happy and excited to get into the sector and to learn about it was because I was coming from the UK where
yeah,
there was 24-hour power supply
mm,
and it was never an issue, whether we were going to have electricity today, tomorrow, or within the next hour.
yeah,
And every time, coming to Nigeria on holiday and then eventually moving to Nigeria, and it was a constant, challenge
yeah,
and understanding the impact it has on the education sector, healthcare sector, on business,
mm,
just life in general. I was happy to move into a sector where I could make a little difference,
yes,
even if I'm not going to achieve universal access, at least, knowing that I'm playing some role, to make that change as opposed to being someone that's just constantly complaining about how things don't work in the country.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. So your current role as a senior director at Universal Energy Facility, tell us about how the organization is helping in working with the community, local community, as well as how the importance of renewable energies, that you're working on. Tell us more about what this organization does.
So SE for All manages a number of programs, one being the Universal Energy Facility, which I lead.
Mhm.
And this facility is essentially a results-based finance facility, which is multi-donor funded. We provide grants to private sector companies who are in the business of developing mini grids or deploying standalone solar solutions for productive use within rural communities. So within those remote communities that don't have access to electricity. The idea is to support economic development and growth within these communities to ensure that no one's left behind. And this aligns with SDG 7.
Mm,
So we don't directly work with the communities, but we do so indirectly in the sense that through the provision of grants we give to these private sector companies who are building solutions, they go into these communities, and get the support, get the agreement to build these solutions and to supply the power to those communities, and therefore, enhancing their lives and also providing jobs as well in most situations too. And so, yes, certainly indirectly, we're very closely linked with rural communities.
That's great. So, when you're talking about again rural communities, of course, you mentioned this earlier. Energy poverty, or access to any source of energy, is still a challenge in many countries, including, I believe, in sub-Saharan Africa. So, what are the major challenges that you face when it comes to implementation of any such projects? Is it from the bureaucratic levels, or is it on the ground, or is it the infrastructure? Is it the money, or is it a combination of all?
Combination of all, I would say the major factor is money, is finance.
Mm,
Uh, Government ordinarily, some might say,
mm,
should be responsible for ensuring that all the residents within their country have access to electricity, access to basic infrastructure. However, we know that in a number of African countries, they may not have the financial capacity, may not have the technical capacity to be able to deploy these solutions at scale and within a short time frame.
Yeah.
And so there's need for that public-private sector partnership.
Partnerships. Mm.
So private sector, they're able to crowd in private sector investment. And this is where, the universal energy facility comes in, understanding that, even though private sector can crowd in finance, but it's not for all projects. When we're looking at rural communities, they're not the most viable of communities. How are they able to pay for the power supply, and how much money there are they even, how much money are they making to be able to pay, and how much power do they even need? Can they even consume sufficient power to keep the mini grid running? And so yeah, this viability gap is there, and oftentimes deters financiers from wanting to invest in these communities. Rather, they would want to go into, urban communities where there is a high level of economic activity, the population density is attractive. The population density, the number of households, are quite significant and close in proximity. So it makes economic sense to deploy some of these solutions. You're going to get a return on your investment. However, when we're looking at rural communities that are sparsely populated, a few households, and like I said, the economic activity is not really that much. Maybe they're into, agricultural processing or agricultural activities. It does become, a factor or deterrent for investment, for, the development of these solutions within these communities. And again, that's where the Universal Energy Facility comes in, because we provide the grants that covers a portion of the cost of deploying these solutions, which should de-risk these projects.
Yeah.
Essentially bring in that investment as a result of a good portion or a good amount of grants that's covering a good portion of the capital expenditure. And secondly, it should also help with the affordability of the power that's being supplied. So with grants covering between 40 to 60% of the capital expenditure, ideally, this should have an impact on the cost of the electricity to the end user, because they shouldn't have to pay for infrastructure that was subsidized or that was covered by a portion of grant funding that doesn't have to be paid back. So finance, in summary, is a major challenge just because of the viability aspect. No private sector company wants to go into business where they're not going to see a profit. They're not going to see a return on investment with reasonable time frame. There's need for patient capital, there's need for patient grants, and there's need for passionate companies as well, because ordinarily, the large companies that are into energy access, again, they're not likely to go into these rural communities. So we need to be able to develop, smaller companies, who are willing to take this risk, to take on smaller businesses and help them build that capacity, help them raise the capital to be able to support government in bridging the energy access gap within the hardest to reach communities.
That's great. I mean, that was actually one of my thought process when you explained all this. In many countries, I think the energy segment is still with the government or with major, huge players, and it actually limits, or there's a lot of entry barriers for smaller companies or even startups to provide, access to, as you rightly said, rural communities. But there have been some interesting case studies, if I remember, from African countries. I'm not sure whether it is specifically from Nigeria, where women have been deployed to, manage the solar panels and such case studies. I remember reading such examples. Do you think the role of women in renewable sector is increasing, and what do you foresee it to be, and how we can actually make the sector more gender equal?
Absolutely. I'm seeing a lot more female leaders
Yeah.
in the renewable energy
And you are
access.
one already.
Far too kind. But yeah. The one being my CEO, Mrs. Damalolo Gumbi, who is fantastic, and she
Mhm.
does her very best to ensure that, women are at the table, their voices are heard.
Yeah.
And not only are their voices heard, that they're also the ones on ground too, designing and installing these solutions. Let me give you some examples.
Mm.
I used to head a program called the Energizing Education program where we were building captive solar hybrid power plants for federal universities. So
Mhm.
they had their own power plant that supplied them with reliable power supply. Um, and Damlola was the overall head of the agency at the time, which the program fell under. And she came up with this idea to have STEM students, female STEM students from these universities we were building power plants for,
Mhm.
to work alongside the EPC contractors, so the companies that were building these projects, so
Yeah.
that they could learn how to design and build out these captive solar hybrid plants.
Mm.
What was interesting was one time when she saw some pictures when, I gave her a report of, this how it's going. The girls are learning so much from site.
Mm.
And she said, why do they look like they just have a pen and, a notebook just taking notes? I need putting the wires
Action.
together, putting the
Exactly.
cables, mounting the panels on the module mounting structures. I need them, with their gloves on and
Yeah.
actually doing the work itself. And that was a game changer. Like we literally got the companies to get them involved. So it wasn't just about looking and taking notes,
Mm.
but actually learning on the job with your hands, doing the work itself, climbing the ladders, get to the rooftops where necessary.
Mm.
Um, this is what we did with the Energizing Education Program. And we were able to empower or train over 120 female STEM students. And a number of them,
Wow, that's
they were
huge.
necessarily, yeah, and a number of them were not necessarily, studying engineering courses. Maybe they were studying like food technology or something like that. And at the end of, the 1 year training, they said, you know what, Anita, I think I'm going to do a master's in renewable energy. I want to get into the energy access space.
Yes.
So they were encouraged from, believing that this was, a man or male dominated
But yeah.
sector, that they too can, play a role. And then we also made it, had some sessions with them to also help them to understand that you don't have to be an engineer to make a contribution in the power sector.
Mm.
You could be a lawyer
You
and
can be a
handle
lawyer.
it, develop the policies, develop the regulations that govern this sector.
Yeah,
You could be
exactly.
financier that's all about, you, probably even resource mobilization, understanding, how to develop the best business model that can attract investment and so on. You could be, monitoring and evaluation expert because we need people who can tell us whether, a project is impactful or not, whether we should be investing more funds or not into a particular project. There's so many
Yeah.
different roles, data analysts, so you can use whatever, not necessarily even with a STEM background,
Yeah, true.
use your transferable skills from the course that you've studied,
Mm.
to make an impact within that sector. So yeah.
That's great. In fact, that actually brings me to a related question. What are the so-called upcoming or futuristic skills or trends in the sector, which probably young professionals can learn and choose? What do you think they should be learning more?
Sort of aligned with, what I said in the previous answer, we're going to need all hands on deck. Like everybody, I think, that there isn't necessarily a new skill that needs to be learned. It could be the skill that you have. Like I said, if you're a lawyer, if you're, an economist or an engineer or whatever it is, it's about figuring out what role you can play, what piece of the puzzle are you
Yes.
towards achieving net zero by 2050, 2060.
Mm.
So I wouldn't really pin down and say this is where everyone should be running towards. No, because we need
Yeah. Mm.
all the various
Different,
skills
different
looking
capabilities coming in. That's true.
together. Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings me to the thought of innovation and startups also, because that's something personally I am very much passionate about, working with sustainable startups and renewable startups and everything. So, can you throw some light on how the startup ecosystem is there, especially in your domain in renewable sector? Do you see some very crazy innovations coming in, or cost-effective solutions? Or are we just adopting what someone else has designed in a Western world? So how does it work there?
Yeah, in terms of being innovative, I think because we're still trying to prove the concept of mini grids and
Mm.
standalone solar solutions and solar home systems, working,
Yeah,
right, and being effective in addressing the energy access challenge. That's not to say that we shouldn't, continue being innovative to come up with more solutions. Like we're seeing. The influx of mesh grids now, which is a combination of a mini grid and a solar home system somewhat uh, together to, you know, address a particular gap. So typically, mini grids are for the larger communities where there is a certain level of economic activity, where it's probably more viable than going into a very remote community where there are a few households and so on, where you'd probably say, okay, let's put in a solar home system. But there are some communities in between those types of communities.
yeah.
Um, and the mesh grid seems to be addressing some of those peculiarities. So that's one of the latest innovations,
Mm.
though it's not so new because it's probably been out for the past 2 to 3 years, but it's getting a lot of traction now.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of startups,
Yeah.
I'm really proud of our women in the sector. We have the likes of Nicole Poindexter, who is the CEO of Energy City, which is a mini grid company. She's building mini grids in Sierra Leone and some other
Mm.
uh, African countries. You have Camille, and I feel so bad because I've forgotten her surname, but she's the CEO of Anchor. She's
Yeah.
building mini Madagascar. Women, not that many,
Yeah.
but there are
People
a few of
entering. Yeah.
them, and they're really doing a great job,
Mm.
right? They're doing a great job showing women that they too can run these types of startups in a very demanding sector. They're
Mhm.
raising finance, they're building out these projects.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so yeah, super proud of them.
So do you foresee, or rather, to the innovation question that I asked, are you seeing any innovation, especially when you are talking about, uh, you know, technology which are quite expensive compared to if you can actually make a disruptive technology which is much cheaper. Have you got any such examples from there?
Yeah, I mean, so we're seeing a shift towards containerized solar solutions as opposed to your um, typical mini grids where you have the PV panels mounted on the module mounting structure into the ground. That's sort of solid. You're seeing lots of solutions where you have the containerized solution that has the PV panels, batteries, everything
Mm.
incorporated. And I guess it just sort of it's easier to move these solutions from one community to the next.
Mm.
Not to say that I encourage that from happening. I know the idea could be behind that is the fact that, some of these communities where they're not paying and it's no longer, viable or
Mm.
sustainable, they may need to leave, but it's an easier way for them to sort of pick up the solution and move to the next village with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
seeing
not the
seeing a lot
right
of
way, though.
it's not the right way, but you could also look at it from a positive angle in terms of just, easy deployment,
Yes, easy
right?
deployment. Yes.
Ready to go,
Mm.
easy to install and get the people to access to electricity within a short time frame.
Mm.
Uh, at SE for All, we have a program called the Africa Renewable Energy Manufacturing Initiative.
Mhm.
And this is where we are promoting the development of
Mm.
manufacturing companies within Africa, within the continent.
Yeah.
Um, as you know, typically most of the renewable energy equipment materials are sourced offshore and not within the continent.
Yeah.
Making it costly, and you have the issue with purchasing equipment in hard currency, and then supplying electricity and being paid for the power being consumed in local currency, and with the macroeconomic issues, the devaluation of the local currency and so on, it makes it very difficult for those companies to make a good return on their investment within a short time frame.
Yeah.
So, somewhat to address that challenge, in addition to the challenge of getting equipment into the country within a good time as well, because sometimes it could take 3-4 months to manufacture and take another how many months for
Yeah.
it to be shipped into the country. This solution, we're hoping will address and make it a lot more cost effective, and also create jobs for the locals, and also make them feel like a sense of ownership and part of this drive towards, bridging the energy access gap with renewable technology, and also transitioning the existing infrastructure, the existing fossil fuel powered solutions to cleaner solutions as well. Starting, the entire process
Yeah.
from home, from within, the countries that will go to deploy these solutions to.
That's great. That's great. I mean, I think necessity is the mother of invention. So when when there's a constraint, that's when new ideas come up. Is what I think works well. Anyway, now that brings me to the next question, which is you're talking about SE for all, which is sustainable energy for all, and then are you only talking about solar, or do you have other newer forms of renewable energy that is being considered or trained, or what are the activities that you do there?
So firstly, the technology or the source of power,
Mm.
I would say predominantly it's
Yeah.
solar hybrid solutions.
Hmm.
Um, we support not only with, infrastructure in terms of providing grants to deploy these infrastructure type projects, but we also um, support governments with policies, regulations in terms of development of policies and regulations to provide the enabling environment for private sector participation and investment within these countries that need the support,
Yeah.
right, to address their energy access challenges.
Mm.
We also have a clean cooking department where we support with the deployment of clean cook stoves, understanding the health issues as a result of inhaling, firewood, an energy transition office. So we support with the development of energy transition plans for governments, so working hand in hand with governments in the development of their energy transition plans, as well as investment plans, because there's one thing to have a plan, it's another thing to be able to raise the funding to implement that plan.
Mhm.
We also support governments with it's a toolkit that helps us to helps public and government to identify communities with or without infrastructure that provides access to electricity. And this is to help private sector companies and even government in making informed decisions as to the right solution to deploy to those communities that don't have access. So whether it be, to extend the main grid based on the proximity of that community to the main grid, or whether it be to deploy a mini grid, a solar home system, standalone solution, or whatever it is. And also providing some granular information in terms of, what type of economic activity is that community engaged in? Do they have schools? Do they have healthcare facilities? So when you have that data readily at hand, it makes it a lot easier for private and government to raise the necessary, finance and interest to play in that market.
So on that note, that brings me to this interesting question of Talking about sustainable energy or renewable energy, I think one of the major role is definitely by the government, and the second major role probably could be the people, the individual users. So how do you? I mean, you're an organization which is trying to bring these policy changes or working with the government officials and bureaucrats and ministers and such people. How do you? Get them into your support, and how do you actually navigate that government support for whatever you're doing, number one. And secondly, on the other side, as I said, how do you actually create that awareness among common public, and how do we get them rallying into this? Specifically, I'm talking about the renewable energy usage.
I mean, involves a lot of stakeholder engagements. We do have a lot of missions to these countries, and we identify the key stakeholders. So whether it be the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Finance,
Mm,
um, all the relevant, I guess, governments, parastatals, agencies, ministries,
mm,
um, and I think the most importantly, it's not for us to go there and impose our own ideas and to force them to do what we're doing, but to showcase what these solutions can do for their country.
mm,
You know, um, hopefully they buy into it. And I think now it's a lot easier. In the past, I don't think solar had much of a good reputation in the past. I guess because of some bad experiences with maybe the longevity of these technologies probably not working after some time.
mm,
But you know, deploying some of these solutions in their countries. So, for example, the Universal Energy Facility, we're not asking them to contribute their own funds. The funds we're using, the grant funding, is coming from philanthropic organizations, other
mm,
sovereigns, and using those funds to build out these solutions, and bringing government to see the end product,
yeah,
right, and witness the impact. That alone, seeing is believing. So it's one thing to talk.
yeah, yeah,
And so if you're able to demonstrate on ground without using their money, first of all,
yeah,
you know, provided the enabling environment is there, like there's still some, laws that allow for this type of work. But you're able to demonstrate this is what, a bit of grant funding,
yeah,
incentivizing the sector can do. It
yeah.
can help you crowd in a lot of private sector finance
Mm,
um, to build out these projects that can address your energy access problem
mm,
in your country. And that leads me to Mission 300. I'm not sure if you've heard about it. This
mm.
is where the World Bank,
Yeah.
the African Development Bank have come together. They're
I
putting
saw
together
a
all their.
recent LinkedIn post by you where you have hosted, or rather, you are moderating a panel with World Bank CEO Ajay Banga and others. So that was amazing.
They are, I mean, yeah, World Bank, AFDB,
Yeah.
the leadership is just amazing where, they're really coming together uh, to, support governments
Mm,
of these African countries in achieving access to electricity for 300 million people,
mm,
which is half of the population without access.
mm,
They want to do this by 2030. The idea was to achieve universal access by 2030, but for me, it's still very ambitious to, address half. If we could achieve half of that 300 million, we've done,
yeah.
amazing, right? Because we are off track right now as we speak from hitting that goal. And
Mm,
so they've come together and they're being supported by the Rockefeller Foundation,
that's
Global Energy Alliance, People and Planet, and Sustainable Energy for All, who
right.
are all providing technical assistance.
If you had the power to come up with a policy change in across the globe, let's say in all countries, what would be that in the segment?
I don't know whether to.
If there is anything that you could do, to save the planet.
I mean, if there's anything I could do to save the planet, would be to have everybody, have all, corporates government's transition from you know, fossil fuel technology to cleaner technologies within a specific time frame,
Mm.
and for penalties to be imposed as a result. But that's yeah, that's it, quite probably quite extreme. But I think probably to encourage more investment in the carbon market space.
Hmm.
So, if you are still engaging in these types of services utilizing
Mm.
fossil fuels, I feel like you should be mandated to contribute a significant amount of profit towards,
So carbon
what the
offsetting. You're
solution
talking about the offsetting market, right? Yeah. Mhm.
exactly within Africa.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I also would like for finance to be a lot cheaper as
Mm.
well.
Mm.
So finance coming from those countries that are, yeah, major contributors.
Yeah.
I think, it's quite sad that, and I understand it's private sector driven, they're driven by profit.
Yeah.
Um, but the cost of finance for African projects is so much more,
Mm.
than the cost of finance. And I understand it's because of the risks involved in doing business in Africa.
Mm.
But considering they're just trying to address an issue that they're suffering, that wasn't necessarily their fault, but the fault of those countries where the finance is coming from.
Mm.
I think it wouldn't be bad to make the capital a lot cheaper to access
Yes.
and a lot more patient as well when it comes to their expectations on when they should be seeing a return on their investment. Understanding that they, ordinarily they're not the most lucrative of businesses.
Mm.
They should look at it more from a CSR
Yeah.
perspective or a blend of that
Mm.
somewhat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a valid point, very important point. The aftermath of what the Western world has done in order to compensate for the sufferings, I think it is important that the money also is given at a lower rate, which is very important. All right, fingers crossed. I think we have spoken a lot, very seriously about so many different things. I hope uh, this conversation gives some pointers to the audience about how complex this segment is and how different multi-level stakeholders are involved. But at the same time, the impact is very important, that we need more voices, more people to be a part of this, and especially women, as you rightly said throughout this conversation. Now, let's come to a lighter note. Let's come back to the original introduction that you gave. You spoke about being a mother and a wife, and you know, um, someone who is passionate about climate change. Um, what do you how do you train your children on sustainable energy, and how do you tell us more about how we can actually develop these qualities in school, or school going children? Tell us something as a mother.
It's so interesting. My daughter, so I have a son and I have a daughter, 12 and 9. My daughter seems more interested. She's always thinking of solutions.
Hmm.
The other day she'd said to me, "Look, Mum, I've got the solution. I know exactly how we could ensure that everyone has access to electricity." I
Hmm.
said, "How?" She said, "All we need to do is have floating PV panels in the ocean and we
Mm.
connect all of the countries." I said,
Wow.
"Hmm, wow." So I have open conversations with them. They do ask me about the job, my job, and
Mm.
what it's all about, and yeah, they're very very excited about it. In terms of just probably everyday general practice, I think from an energy efficiency point of view,
Mm.
understanding the need to turn off the lights and not
Yes.
keep them on.
Mm.
And in Nigeria, we sort of have this culture of, and I'm not speaking for all, but some, turning on all the lights, and that's because you know the light situation is very epileptic. So one day you may have it, tomorrow you may not. This hour you have it, next hour you don't. So when it's on, so it could be that it was on and then the grid power you no longer had good power and you didn't realize that you didn't switch off the lights, and then the good power comes back on and then all the lights are on, and then yeah, for whatever reason, you don't switch it off. That culture of preserving energy, I don't think it's universal yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because we're just not used to having power all the time. So when there is light, you just sort of leave them all on.
Yeah.
So, encouraging them to always ensure that the lights are off and that we use energy wisely. And we also have solar in our house as our backup solution for when there is no grid power. So yeah, I think the visually seeing
Yeah.
importance of yeah, renewable energy.
Yeah, that's great. That's brilliant. I think whatever we are doing right now, I always talk about this. It is the next generation who we have to, what do you call, we have a responsibility to the next generation, and unfortunately we have already messed up the planet, and we are handing over a messed up planet to the next generation to solve it. But
Yeah.
having said that, since I also teach the Gen Zs today in a university, I see the kind of energy they bring in. I see the kind of innovative ideas that they have, just like your daughter said. I think the next generation is definitely more focused or pro sustainable energy or sustainability as such, and that's something which is amazing. Though the harm has been done by our generation and our previous generations, I think the planet is in a relatively safer hands with the next generation. That's what I think.
Oh,
Let's hope
I
so.
hope so.
All right, so I think with that, let's come to a closure for this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on this SheSight She Power podcast series. It's been amazing for a couple of reasons. One, it's very rare to find, as you rightly said, someone in a male-dominated segment like sustainable power or any energy, engineering and power sector, which is amazing. And I really think you are a role model for young women out there, not just in Africa but across the globe. So that's really the reason why we wanted to feature you and share your story to all our audience. And thank you once again for joining us. And secondly, I think the concept of sustainable energy and what you are doing, your organization, as well as the necessity to continue the conversation in this segment is very important. And as a media house, I think SheSight is working towards bringing women's voices along with voices in this domain of sustainability as well. So thank you so much once again. On behalf of the entire SheSight crew, I would like to place on record our sincere gratitude for you and also all the amazing work that you are doing.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I didn't realize I would enjoy this conversation this much. Thank you for giving me the platform to share my story and hopefully to, have an influence on some young woman or even man out there to, get into the space and try and make a difference, even if it's a very small difference, towards saving our planet. So I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Before you move on to the next video, I have a request to make. If you like this video and this podcast, if you gain some valuable information out of this video, I would request you to click on the subscribe button as well as follow us on our social media pages. The links are given in our description. Also, do sign up to our website, www.shesightmag.com. We have amazing women stories as well as various women initiatives that are getting launched in the coming months. I'll see you there.